Good afternoon. Welcome to the meeting of the General Purposes Committee. Can I ask the Clerk any apologies?
Apologies from Councillors Bennett, Boys, DeVink and Thompson.
Any other apologies? No. Order of business?
Potentially a change. Kevin Anderson, Head of Housing and Community Safety, won't be available for a little while yet, so perhaps we'll take item 7 right at the end of the meeting.
Is that agreed? Agreed, thank you. The minutes of the meeting of 20th August. Pass. Yes, move on now to item 5, Civic Government Scotland Act 1982. Is that for noting?
Yes.
Right, thank you. That's at 5A, and at 5B we've got the temporary public entertainment licence. That's in Newton Grange. There's a report there by the Director. Any comments from anyone on that one? Does the committee endorse the actions that were taken at that time? And we note that there has been a warning given to the person in the show. Persons Guild has been informed of it, so hopefully in future, if it does, I don't think we can be so lenient, I think, with them on a future occasion, should that happen again. Councillor Johnson.
Is it right that when the fair comes to town, there has to be an application submitted to 2 departments? Can that not be streamlined, please?
We could look at that, but essentially they need the landowner's permission before they can make application. It's always been handled separately, but we can take it back and have a look at it if members so wish.
Anyway, other members' thoughts on that one? Maybe is it worth? Will we have a look at it and we'll have a look at it and report back? Councillor Beattie.
On the provision that it's cost neutral, that is, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, noted. Right, thank you. Right. Item 6. It's the Smeaton Open Cast. Do you want to?
Here, the local members were asked to have a look at this. Site visit was carried out, and they recommend that 2 benches be sited just beyond the school campus. So we're asking members to consider and, if so minded, approve.
Thank you. Any comments?
Approval.
Approval. Thank you. No, thank you.
You'll see that most of them have had much difficulty in deciding on the policy. The most recent one we're quoting there is from Aberdeen, where they've said they've actually carried out a study, and they've decided to leave the matter meantime, and they will review the matter. Obviously, the Head of Housing and Community Safety can speak to the paper that went before, and in which case I think I would ask Mr Anderson to speak.
Thank you, Chair. As has been mentioned, this report is a follow-on from the paper that was produced in January, where members were requesting additional information. There haven't been a lot of development since the report in January, as my colleague Mr Atack's indicating. Certainly we were anticipating that on the release of census information, that would allow us to review the population change in the formation of households in terms of the impact on demand for accommodation across Midlothian, and certainly that has begun to become available. There are different rafts of information which come as a result of the census information, but there's just headline information presently which indicates that the household formation in Midlothian is under that of the Scottish average. In terms of formations in Scotland, they are being created at a rate of 8.2% between 2001 and 2011. In Midlothian, the respective figure for that is 6.2, so we're under the Scottish average. And in terms of those forming individual households, the Scottish average is 4.4% over the 10 years from 2001 to 11. And in Midlothian, that's at 2.8%, so we're under 3% in the formation of actual households from the last census figures. There's still further detailed census information to become available. As I say, these are just the headline figures. We're also in the process presently, towards the year end, of the revision of the CESS plan, the South East Scotland review of housing needs and demand, and the planning considerations for provision of new build housing as a consequence of that. That isn't expected to be completed until into January. So there will be further information which becomes available, which obviously we'll be able to share with members at that time. But certainly in terms of the over-provisioning, back in January I anticipated that there would be increased pressure and request for HMO properties coming forward as a consequence of welfare reform, because predominantly younger single people, those under age 35, would be limited to what's termed the shared room rate, in that they would not have exclusive use of a property. They would have to share facilities, kitchens and or bathrooms. That said, that hasn't come through as yet. We're 6 months into welfare reform, and I'm aware members have requested a seminar for precisely that, for a review of where we are 6 months into that. But certainly that hasn't had an impact on the formation and provision of additional HMOs at this stage.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr Anderson. Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Chair. I must take this opportunity to declare an interest as a City of Edinburgh licence holder for several HMOs. And I apologise to committee for not having done so at the beginning of this item. The Standards Commission have previously upheld my view that there is no conflict of interest between sitting in matters to do with HMOs in Midlothian, since there is no relationship with ourselves and that of Edinburgh City Council. But if the convener takes a different view, or legal officer present takes a different view, I'd be happy to recuse myself from this item.
Well, it's not for the convener or me to tell you, but it's your decision. In the cases of doubt or ambiguity, the prudent thing to do is to withdraw.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Members, comments or questions on the report? Anything there? Sorry, Councillor Miller.
Derek, I understand where Kevin's having problems with this here, and I can understand where the council's going to have problems with this. Just with Kevin's ending remarks here, that single persons at a certain age can only get a house or a room rate for a house in multiple occupancy. And indeed, even a lot of young working folk now don't want to take a house. They're happy to take a room because they can't afford the private rentals, and they can't afford the electric bills, the rates bills and that when they're just themselves. Neither can they afford to take on a mortgage if they can get one. So I think Kevin's quite right to point out that we are going to be hit with them. But I think we have to have something in place, because if you take a look at what triggered this, we have an area in Gorebridge High Street. Now, if I mind right, I think we're in house number 4. That's now a house of multiple occupancy within a very short period of time. Now, the residents there were quite clearly saying that it had changed completely the ambience of what the street was, and you were getting to the stage, because there was that many houses of multiple occupancy with single young people in them, that the area was becoming unattractive for folk to stay in, and therefore trying to sell houses, the only folk really interested in buying them up were people who were thinking of leasing them out. And I think somewhere along the line we'll have to find a way of being able to sort of say, well, we do have to take houses of multiple occupancy, we're going to have to take a heck of a lot. But I think there's a great danger if we do nothing, that we're quite simply going to be pressed in certain areas for the whole areas to become areas of house of multiple occupancy. Now, in all honesty terms, that might suit in operational terms, Kevin, or the people who are letting that out, because it's maybe better for them in operational terms if they have to have a... Because I think one of the agreements we had, that there was a warden or somebody there supervising it. So there has to be a great encouragement to that person to look, well, if I'm going to buy any more, I might as well get in these houses of multiple occupancy in the same bit, because I've already got the warden there. The problem is that conglomerates. Now, and I've got to be stressed here, there's a house of multiple occupancy about 5 doors along the road for me. All the folk in it are working, and you wouldn't actually ken it's a house of multiple occupancy. But the problem is that there are areas now where you are getting them conglomerated, and I think that the sort of area that the lady in question at that time was taking, and I'm aware there's no press here, I think it was a lot of the more challenging tenants that lady was taking. And therefore the area was becoming where you had 4 houses that had single young men in them who were challenging young men. And the danger to that is that you get an area in your community that ends up quite blighted if we didn't find a way of dealing with this.
Thank you.
The difficulty is, I think, that how the situations have arisen in the Gorebridge area in particular, is that the types of property that exists in the one location are the larger, older style of properties that lend themselves to be converted into to be in houses of multiple occupancy, and the fact that they're above shops, or in fact were shops at one time that couldn't be sold on, made them quite lucrative deals for the people that want to get involved in that kind of business. So it's almost by the nature, and I suppose it could happen in any of the town centres for that very similar reason. I think the issue in Gorebridge was exacerbated by the fact that there are also a number of temporary accommodations in the area, not just HMOs, temporary accommodations that are used obviously by the council for temporary homeless accommodation as well. And I think people kind of focused in and included all of that in their view as to the issue of the HMOs. There are actually 3 HMOs in the main street in Gorebridge. One is right up towards the school. It's a fair bit away from the main street, and the other one is beyond that. But I can understand, as Derek says, and I can understand Kevin's perspective on this, because I think it is the case that we are going to have increasing pressure in all our communities, probably dotted around all areas of communities, for HMOs, just for the reasons that have been stated in regard to welfare reform. It's interesting looking at the paperwork here in terms of how other authorities have wrestled with this issue. Sometimes it's a fair bit different from the situation we're in, where we're talking about student accommodation when it's near universities and things like that. That isn't obviously the case here. But again, as Derek says, that there are HMOs and private lets and things like that all over the place where people are working, and we never have any difficulties with them. And I think during the discussion on the HMOs in Gorebridge Main Street, I think it was really our opinion at the end of the day that a lot of the issues that were taking place in the Main Street at that time actually weren't directly related to the HMOs. So these kind of things take arms and legs, grow arms and legs, and kind of get out of hand. But I certainly, you may take a different view if there was another couple of HMOs going into that area, just because of it does have an effect to changing the nature of the kind of population. It used to be that all the folk in Gorebridge Main Street would have lived there for most of their life. You're totally changing that kind of thing, and it's how we actually get a rule in there. I'm not quite clear how we would actually put in a rule for over provision there. I'm interested if anybody else has got any ideas on that.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jim. We just be going through listening to yourself and Derek, and what I've been thinking myself is just how difficult it is, because it's a wide diverse amount of HMOs that we have. In fact, we've got one in Pennycook that is actually, it's termed an HMO, but it's vulnerable adults who are there. It's run by St Joseph's, and you know that's not the problem. There's various different types, and I think if we were going to go down this road, we would need to have a report on it, look at it, and then one that would stand up if we could. But whereas, could I maybe ask at this stage, Bob and Willie, if they could maybe say, you know, would we, if we left it until treat each one on its merits, and then if one did come up and it did concern us about over-provision, could that be dealt with at the time that the application's made?
I think in the absence of a policy on over-provision, it does make it very difficult for the members to refuse an application on the grounds of over-provision, because you don't have... What is the basis for doing so? Normally you would expect to have a formula set out. I mean, I think Kevin's initial report sets out a formula which could be applied throughout Midlothian. And you then, if the issue of over-provision comes up, you can then assess the application in terms of whether or not it exceeds the threshold or not. Certainly from a legal point of view, and I've said this before, that it would be good to have a policy in place so that everyone at least has an idea of what's allowed in particular localities.
Yeah, I would just think it would be difficult because of that, because you could end up not one back that's not going to be a problem at all, and actually could give us more problems in how we deal with the people. Now, so if I can ask Ian to come in, and then I'll come round to Brian after that.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think the crux of the problem seems to be not so much the number of HMOs, but the kind of HMOs. If you get concentration of one particular type in one area, there's one in our ward which I think is actually it's a large house which is just for old folk. Now, they've got the same situation in Edinburgh, where I think March month the issue was not the number of HMOs, but the number of student HMOs there. And our problem, I think, if we took into account the number of a particular type in an area, say in Gorebridge, for instance, when we came to make the decision, then if, say, for instance, in Gorebridge, there was an HMO came up for students, and we said, well, that's fine because there aren't any nearby, and then subsequently that became an HMO for a different category within society, then we presumably wouldn't be able to go back and change our decision because we've already made a decision on it being an HMO. Is that correct?
Again, I'd obviously take some advice from Kevin in terms of his experience on housing, but generally speaking, if you have a policy, an over-provision policy, it doesn't mean to say you have to follow that policy slavishly. In fact, if you follow it too slavishly, that can be an unreasonable exercise of discretion. So there can be exceptions to the policy depending on the particular circumstances of an application.
Chair, maybe just to assist members who are quite evidently aware of the range of different types of HMO which come before GP committee, as well as those which are not contested. And certainly, in my understanding of the HMO regulations, we can't make the distinction in terms of the client group that we're being served. It is the principle of an HMO in itself. Whether committee would be able to make that a condition, again, we would take legal advice, and I'm trying not to bat this back and forward between officers, but certainly my understanding is there's no provision in the regulations that we can make that distinction unless legally we're told otherwise. In terms of a formula, as indicated, we certainly made an attempt at a formula in January, and we could further refine that because, as I say, in terms of the census information and the housing and needs demand, which is currently going on with the Scottish Government and be concluded in January, we'll be in that position. So at least it would give you a formula at a starting point where there was any contested HMO or the basis of objections being made to committee, and then obviously it's for the debate to determine whether that's exception beyond a stated policy or formula. Is probably the only further advice I could give you.
Yeah, it's a very difficult one. I think I've said that before, you know, that they have a policy, and if it's rigid, you know, then they're open to legal action on it, you know, and it can be as complicated as that. On the client groups, yeah, we can take people's suggestions. It's going to be working people only, older people only, students only, unemployed only. You know, we can take suggestions of what is, but once we grant it, you know, that circumstances can change because we've just granted the licence. We can't make a client group a restriction or a planning restriction on it. And people have perceptions of antisocial behaviour from different client groups, but we can't go on perceptions because we have to go on, you know, actual fact, you know, as case. And the biggest perception is from the high impact HMOs. You know, I've absolutely no problem with it. The ones like on New Battle Road at S Bank. You know, I've absolutely no problems with that because it's low impact, it's big garden space and everything else. But you know, I've been approached by quite a few constituents when it's right on the main street. You know, there's no garden space. You know, the window is just fully accessible. You know, fully visible. You know, to people walking by, and the perceptions of that being a nuisance factor is a lot more. So to get a policy that's different client groups and different geographical settings, you know, you can't have a policy on that kind of basis. You know, to deal with everyone on its own merits, maybe there is planning restrictions we can put on, particularly looking at the geography of a planning application for an HMO, or looking at, you know, the organisation that's coming for it, you know, because there's a big demand for them. You know, and it could then go into just basically demand-led kind of service. And how do you then control that? You know, if it's so demand-led, you know, it's just a difficult one. And to try and be flexible on that, I'm sorry, I'm not giving you any solutions to or even suggestions to my questions, but I'm just, you know, sympathising. You know, that it's very difficult to have a policy on it.
Yeah, I think it's just maybe worth raising a couple of wee things, especially for members who haven't been here for as long as I have. I mean, for years and years now, we've actually seen a change where Melville, Castle Rock and even the council have went away for having big units with big areas of houses and multiple occupancy. The latest one, I think, was Melville, that I think we ended up taking partially its licence off it, Kevin. And it was about having that conglomeration, the groups of people all in the one place. Another place, and again I'm aware the press only here, is the Inverhaven and Lone Headbob. You can mind how many times it's been up, and indeed when we tried to do something about it, we lost in the sheriff court, and because we didn't have policies to deal with it, we hadn't dealt with it right. And I remember when the Goldbridge, that one in Goldbridge High Street came in, that there was certainly a sense I felt that there was a heck of a pressure on the local members to have to do something about it. But the reality is there was nothing for them to do, because the only argument you were getting from the protesters was an over-provision. That was the only real. They were using stuff, as Jim says, that was, oh, they were bringing, there was trouble in the street, or it could have been in that house, but nobody could actually categorically say, and neither did the police say, that there had been any incidents. But the reality there is, when the elected members were looking to say, well, we're not keen, when we looked through it, there was nothing here for us to say, no, we can't. And to go back, as I say, the council, Melville, all the registered social landlords that had the big places, where they had flats, where they put all the folk that had either drink problems or antisocial problems and that, it became quite apparent when you conglomerate them all into one place, is it just actually brings the hail the whole area down and causes you more and more problems, where we found ourselves actually taking licence off the council-run and council-supported properties, which was quite embarrassing at the time. So I think we'll have to find some way of dealing with this. It might be all right, maybe Edinburgh, Aberdeen, Glasgow and that can sort of sup all this up and loose it in their big cities. We can't. So we really need to find some form of solution. And I mean, having read the paper and looked through it, I mean, I think in planning terms, for example, if you take some uses, you can get a statement in there where perhaps maybe, like say, where you have that many a type of business that is detrimental to the area or affects the ambience of the area or something like that. And I do understand it's really difficult, and I wish I had a solution here, because I think the point's been made with a couple of folks speaking that there are different HMO types, and I don't know, I heard Kevin saying there that you can't mitigate for them, but is it not possible to say that where, for example, it's supported accommodation, or we think that the residents are going to need support, that we have them to sort of want a street or something like that? And I think that's the problem, where it is these areas there, so we'll not beat about the bush. Is this conception that it's young people or people with drink or drug problems that are the problem for us?
Thanks, Kim, do you want to come in on that one?
Thank you. Just in terms of point of advice for members, certainly whilst I understand there being main concerns about larger developments and larger properties, it's simply a matter of 3 people or more who are unrelated occupying a property then constitutes an HMO. So some of these organisations, which members are aware of, have unintentionally created HMOs and then had to go through the due process to be regulated, because it wasn't their intention to be an HMO, it was their intention to serve particular client groups in terms of their operations and what they exist for. So an HMO has been a byproduct of what they've actually had to manage and produce. But certainly in terms of if members are minded to have an over-provisioning policy, and largely I would caution against it, but if you're minded to have one, what we can provide for you is the formula based on geography, density, and we're able to combine that to make a formula, and that's the basis to start from, and then it's on each application as it comes before members, depending on the client group, what's being catered for in terms of lifestyles, if I can term it that way, that might cause consideration for members to take account of on an individual basis. So at least it's getting over the issue of the geographic spread and the density of the population that's being served there. We can give you that formula. Beyond that, it is then judgment calls for members to make.
Thanks, Bob, Kath, and then Jim. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. I think we have general agreement in the fact that we require a policy, otherwise we can't make any statements on it to back it up. Drawing up the criteria will be the difficult stage, but I think we have agreement to go ahead with that.
I agree with nearly everybody, but I think the idea to flood an area with one specific client group is not conducive to good relations in a community. And if there's too many of one type in the one community, there will only be harmony. So I agree with Bob that we should have that.
I know that there's been press coverage recently, and some individuals, community councillors, etc., have made comments about the situation in Gorebridge, and that what they're talking about is what they see as the over-provision within the village as a whole. And if we are going to have an over-provision condition or rule, I don't think it's about how many HMOs we have in Gorebridge or in Newton Grange or in Dalkeith. It almost comes down to street level, because it's about community cohesion. How I've described the situation in Gorebridge is, as I say, traditional, people lived in the main street for years. It was, the same sort of, the same people, the same families. They knew each other. That no longer is the case. Increasingly, is no longer the case. So to me, it really comes down to judging almost on a street-by-street basis. And if we were going to have some kind of over-provision, we would need to look at it on the basis, say, a percentage of the population of the street. And you know, I think that the census information that we didn't have yet, I think I would really want to see that before we came down with a hard and fast rule, because things are changing, and it would be helpful, I think, to get that kind of information. But for me, definitely, if we're going to do something like that, it has to be looking at a street and how many that kind of property you have in a street, rather than in a larger community.
Brian.
Yeah, it's just getting to the word, defining it over provision. You know, actually defining, you know, putting numbers to it. But when we're dealing with plan applications, you know, just even somebody building a block of flats, we deal with a consideration called amenity space. You know, and I think, you know, some kind of amenity space considerations should maybe be given in our policy as well.
Thanks. Any other comments at this stage anyone wants to make? I think at this stage I'm still a bit wary about actually coming out and saying, yeah, we'll have an over provision. Should we get a proper report on it first, which would, you know, give us some information on what we're actually wanting to put in place?
Is it maybe worth setting up a small working group, cross-party, just to sort of have a look at it along with Kevin, and maybe ask the police if they wanted to put an input into it, somebody for legal, just to make sure what we're doing is right, because we do need something. And you're right, Chair, to point out we do need something that allows us a bit of flexibility as well. So that if you're getting somebody coming in that's only want to rent out flats to workers or students that are going to be travelling back and forward, that we can sort of say, well, right, we'll give that a shot. But we do need something.
Yeah, is that... Yeah, I think...
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Right. Do we want to propose the make-up of this committee just now and just get it up and moving?
I'm quite happy to ask for Jim for your side to go on and accept nominations for anybody else.
Thank you. Proposal.
I'd nominate in his absence Owen Thompson as housing portfolio holder.
That sounds good. Right. Can we proceed along these lines then? That'll be good, don't we? Yeah.
I will okay to say that if the person can't make it, they can send a sub. Aye. Okay.
Yeah. Is that everybody? Yeah.
So just to say, I'm happy for I'm happy for the makeup of the group to go ahead on that basis. I'll just, you know, I'm reassured by the debate we've had today that it's moving along the right lines. So as long as I'm kept informed of progress, I'm quite happy not to be actually directly involved. But if they want, either side wants me to be involved, I'm equally happy to do so.
I propose Ian backs that as well.
Right, Ian, if you want. And I would think, though, it doesn't preclude other councillors from, you know, putting in points of view and feeding them back and in, you know. So I think everyone's got to put in a viewpoint. But if we proceed along these lines, that's great. Right.
Well, I'd happy to propose that the make-up is Councillor Muirhead, Councillor Thompson and Councillor Baxter.
Right. Thanks very much. We go with that? With subs, yep. Thanks very much, everyone, for your attendance. Thank you. Bye.